Baku. G'day, friends and family. Welcome to the Baku podcast. You're here with Mark Philpott, and wherever you are, whatever you're up to today, I'd like to welcome you here. Thanks so much for tuning in. So, we've been really fortunate recently, not to rub it in too much, but we had a pretty well-timed trip up to Queensland, which was fantastic. Got to enjoy some warm weather and, most importantly, a little bit of freedom, which we've all been struggling with here in Victoria. I think we're the most locked down city in the world, in particular Melbourne. So I acknowledge, a lot of people are finding it really tough right now out there. And, thoughts with you if you are having a tough time at the moment, because I know this pandemic has compounded a whole lot of the normal things that crop up in life that are challenges. It's just making things really difficult for people. So I want to acknowledge that. But for the next little while, I hope we can just take ourselves away from what's happening, away from the ordinary, away from perhaps some of the things that we're sitting with. And I want to talk about a topic that has been swirling around in my brain for a little while. And because we've been out camping, I noticed that this can be something that that gets in the way sometimes, that makes things quite unpleasant for the people around us, but also something that's important. And that important thing, of course, is gas. So today I am talking about gas. I'll explain a little bit about what that is in a moment. I'll explain a little bit about the conditions or the patterns that lead to us feeling quite gassy. And I've got a couple ideas about how we can use gas to our advantage. Because your gas has a scent. And that scent is worth paying attention to. So, this podcast, look, it's for my benefit, clarifying a few of my ideas, having a play with a few ideas, and I hope bringing you along for the journey adds some value and some inspiration to your life too. And at the end of this, I hope that it helps us together move forward in life with some joy and some conviction, because hey, we only get to do this whole life thing once. So, to begin with, what is gas? I know if you're a musician, particularly a guitarist, you'll be familiar with the term gas, or as it's better known, Gear Acquisition Syndrome. In the guitar circles, we call it Guitar Acquisition Syndrome. But, it's equally applicable to any other endeavour that we might enjoy in life. So there's surfboard acquisition syndrome, car acquisition syndrome, photography gear acquisition syndrome. Pretty much any interest or pursuit that we find of interest can lead to a bit of gear acquisition syndrome. And gear acquisition syndrome on its own, it can be both healthy and unhealthy. It can be quite a good thing. It leads to a sense of well-being for us at a particular level. But on the other hand, if it gets out of control, it can lead to some quite detrimental effects on our well-being and our productivity. So what does gas look like, or what does it sound like? So in private, gas probably looks like browsing the internet for hours and hours. So this is a phenomenon. Like, we can shop for gear, we can look at gear, we can browse gear, we can read about gear, we can watch reviews on gear 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, if we so choose. And the internet has made shopping just so much more accessible. It used to be quite a challenge. If we were interested in let's take a guitar, for example. I'll probably talk quite a bit about guitars in this episode because it is the object of a lot of my personal gas. But in the old days, I'm only 30-something, but When we were younger, going out and looking for a guitar was an effort. We had to go to a guitar shop. We had to find a guitar shop that stocked the guitar of interest, make sure they had one on the shelf, and we had to get out there. Quite often for me, it was Blackburn Music. And we'd get out there, Billy Hyde's, and we'd go and we'd play the guitars. We'd sit in the room, and it was an experience. We got to hear the guitars, we got to touch the guitars, play the guitars, get a feel for what they were like. But nowadays, it's become quite private. And in one sense, we lose a lot of that experience when we turn to online shopping because we can't pick it up and feel it in our hands. We don't get a first-hand experience of what that instrument sounds like. So in private nowadays, gas can look a lot like spending a lot of time just browsing gear. In public, gas or gas bagging often looks like posting lots of photographs of gear on social media feeds or talking incessantly about the gear that we have or the gear that we want to have to somebody who we hope will find it as interesting and captivating as we do. So a little bit of gas can be quite healthy. Better out than in, as they say. But sometimes it can become quite unpleasant to be around. So what generates gas? One of the phenomena that we noticed here on the Surf Coast during this whole pandemic business is that surfboard sales went through the roof. The surfboard shapers couldn't keep up. The supply of blanks to make those surfboards couldn't keep up. And the interesting thing was people who couldn't even get to the beach because of their lockdown radius were ordering multiple surfboards. So my theory is this: gas or gear acquisition syndrome, the pursuit of the things that are the tools really to do the things that we love, but the pursuit of the stuff, the gear, it actually helps us to fill the void in the absence of the activity that piece of equipment was designed for. So searching for or going out and purchasing more gear helps us when we can't get to the activity. And for a lot of people in lockdown, it was probably quite therapeutic to spend some time watching reviews of gear, evaluating the gear that they would like to own for when they finally can get back to the pursuit that they are craving so deeply. So the equation for gas, in my understanding, is that when disposable income is greater than the time available to participate in the activity, then gas increases exponentially. And it's not just lockdowns when this happens. And this also happens when we're perhaps tied up with other things that keep us from our passions and desires. So for example, actually no, I'm going to keep that example. But I want to give you this picture first. So we all have this energy inside us. And this energy gets bottled up. It's potential energy then that we carry around inside us. So if you can imagine a soda stream where you carbonate your own soda water at home. When you start pumping the gas in, and that bottle can only hold so much carbonation before it starts leaking out. And it leaks out because you can hear it gas off. So we're just like soda streams. We carry around this little bottle inside us and it's full of energy. And when that energy can't find the most full expression of what it is, then it starts leaking out and we start to get a bit gassy. So there are some internal factors and external factors that compress that energy inside us. Externally, there are things like jobs, family commitments perhaps, or things that are outside of our control like lockdown, stay-at-home restrictions. And then there are some internal factors that also lead to a build-up of that energy, which leads to gassiness, and that's a lack of confidence perhaps. Personally, there are some voices in my own head that sometimes devalue the work that might come from playing guitar, writing songs. And these voices or external factors lead us to avoid doing the work, and instead we focus all our energy on the pursuit of these things that represent those activities. So gas, a little bit of gas can be okay, because it meets a lot of our psychological human needs. It fulfills that need for agency and control. It fulfills that need for excitement and adventure. And it also fulfills a need for belonging, fitting in with others, and also the need for significance. And hopefully, it also offers an opportunity in our minds to fulfill that need for contribution and growth. So, a guy I used to work with, a real character, a fellow guitarist, one of the schools where I used to work, he'd often stop me in the corridors on a fairly regular basis. And the interactions would go something like this. Hey, Mark, have you got a moment? Check this out. He'd pull out his phone. And on the phone, there'd be a picture of a beautiful guitar. He'd say, I'm going to buy this guitar. It's beautiful. I've just found it. He shows me the photo of the guitar. Both of us look at it lustfully. We smile. We giggle. And then we comment on how beautiful the instrument is. He wells up with feelings of validation and pride because he's been able to share this conquest with somebody who also has a similar interest in guitars. For some people, I suppose these conversations can also lead to feelings of significance and status because we're about to, or we do own something that's rare or sought after. And perhaps we believe it might help us to become the envy of our friends. There's an element of control because it's pretty easy if you've got the disposable income to go out and buy stuff. It's easy to do, to have a credit card. And there's excitement because there's the thrill of the chase too. You know, looking for the right instrument at the right price, the right piece of gear, the right surfboard, the right camera. There is a bit of a sense of adventure and excitement, almost like hunting something down. So that's how gas can help us to meet some of those needs on a fairly simple, almost immediate level. So footy fans, it's the other example that comes to mind. Footy fans and their gas. Purchasing the club jersey, the scarf, the flags, the memorabilia, the stickers, all satisfy that need for belonging. So one of the things I noticed when I first started at the gym here, playing Muay Thai with people, was it fascinated me in the beginning that people were quicker to purchase themselves hoodies and T-shirts with the gym logo on it. And they were happy in the meantime. Having spent their money on hoodies and T-shirts, they were happy to use communal gloves that other people had been wearing and sweating in, and communal shin guards that other people had been wearing and sweating in, and then they were sort of tossed under the stairs in a big bucket. And for a little while, this bamboozled me, why anybody would prefer to have the merchandise rather than the core equipment that was needed for this activity that they had just thrown themselves into. But what I came to understand over a little bit of time is this is just like the footy fan who wants to fit in and find that sense of belonging and purpose by being part of a tribe. And the T-shirts with the branding, with the logos, it's the same in the surf industry. People will go out and buy surf gear when they perhaps have never ridden a surfboard before. But there's this deep desire to fit in. And there's no judgment about whether or not this is a good or a bad thing to be doing. But I do think it helps to shine a light on these things so that we become more conscientious in what we're consuming and why we're consuming it. Because if we buy a T-shirt with the understanding that, yeah, this is about belonging and fitting in and being part of the community, then that's fantastic. I think it's when these things sort of go under the radar, when we're not aware, when they slip in under the awareness that we perhaps do these things and then they don't quite satisfy our desires on a deep level, and we're left feeling disappointed. So, we're all human. We all love to buy some stuff. I grew up in circles where perhaps sometimes consumerism was looked at as a unhealthy or evil pursuit. The term I think we used in spiritual circles was idolatry, which is basically to idolize stuff, material things, put something else in place of what's truly and deeply important to us. As a 5-year-old, I often got this term confused with adultery, which is, of course, sleeping with your neighbour's husband or wife. And the two terms are not quite interchangeable, but very confusing for a 5-year-old, these two words to be introduced to. But you know what? We're all human. We all need a certain level of stuff in our lives. So I don't think there is any shame that needs to come with going out and purchasing the things that we need. And certainly not shame that anybody else would have us feel by pointing the finger at us. But I do think it's important to be conscientious, because really the goal of buying the stuff is to meet our personal psychological needs and to meet them really well, to do that on a deep level that empowers us to be who we are in this world. So I want to talk about the scent, because your gas has a particular scent. And when we pay attention to that scent, it shines a light on a few really important things. So, for example, some people's gas is guitar-scented, others are photography-scented, or perhaps art-scented. Some people's gas has a particularly mechanical scent. And when we find out and we pay attention to what most of our gas is centered on, then it points us towards where our true passions and talents may lie. So another way of thinking of gas could also be to think of it as Gear Appreciation Syndrome. That's where, it's actually a good thing to appreciate the things that are the object or the center of our gas, because these things point us to our true desires. It's good when something grabs your curiosity, sparks an interest. That's your way of recognizing the value of somebody else's passion and work that they've poured into creating that particular piece of gear. To demonstrate that, look, between 1952 and 1954, there was a group of dudes, Leo, Bill, George and Freddie, who put their heads together and they came up with a new type of electric guitar. Their full names, of course, Bill Carson, George Fullerton, Freddie Tavers and Leo Fender. And the guitar, of course, that they came up with is what most people would consider to be the quintessential electric guitar. It's the most recognisable shape of guitar, and that's the Fender Stratocaster. And this is fascinating to me, because Leo Fender, he wasn't apparently much of a musician himself. He was a bit of a self-taught electronics tinkerer. He didn't have any fancy degrees. He was considered a bit of an outsider to the guitar manufacturing industry. But he had this dream and this vision to create a better guitar. And as we know, that guitar has become the tool of choice for so many great musicians. Hendrix, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Eric Clapton, John Mayer. When you think about blues and rock, it's really hard to imagine that music without the Stratocaster guitar. And that guitar has become a legacy. It's captivated and empowered generations of musicians, which to me is how consumerism gets played at its best. People building products that they're passionate about to empower others to create their work in the world. And the Stratocaster has let so many musicians get their ideas out, to flesh them out, to share them with the world. So a little bit of gear appreciation syndrome, or GAS, is a good thing. It shows it's our way of giving back a little bit of something to the creators of those fantastic pieces of gear, showing them that their work is a valued contribution in the world. But sometimes, because these things are so well designed, they're so appealing, they're so fantastic, sometimes our gas gets a little bit out of hand and we start to get a little bit compulsive about our product research. Or if funds allow for it, we end up filling whole rooms and cupboards with gear that we no longer use. And to me, this is where it all starts to feel a little bit sad. Because I know it's really sad looking at guitars that I've owned that I know I'm just not playing. They've spent a year or more sitting in the cupboard. And the funny thing is, when I feel that urge to start making more music, I often start looking at other guitars that might help me to bring these ideas into the world. And purchasing a guitar because we believe it's going to help us to write those songs, to record that album, it satisfies that feeling that energy is created. It satisfies the agitation. It takes the edge off for a little while. But there's definitely a better way to channel that energy and to release that energy. Because we know when our friends are really into something and they're talking about it all the time, talking about the gear that they're chasing, or the gear that they own, perhaps, that's great for a little while. But what we really want to hear is not what they own. We want to hear what they made. We want to hear what they've created, what they've brought into the world. We want to see the photos they've taken, read the book that they wrote, hear the podcast that they made. So, incidentally, if you do find somebody with really bad gas, though, you can turn that around to your benefit, because quite often they'll sell you their gear really cheap, which has led to some really good guitar and surfboard purchases. So keep that in mind if you find that friend who's talking way too much about their gear. Shifting from gas, obviously the energy we're talking about, the energy built up inside us, is our talents and our work, the expression of who we are that we bring into the world through all this gear. So I wanted to dive into a little bit of a parable now about talent. And look, there's a lot of people will tell you, no, it's not about talents. It's about, a talent was just a unit of measurement in ancient times that was used to measure out money. So when they're talking about talents, has nothing to do with your talents. But as I've said before on this podcast, money is a fantastic metaphor for energy, because we exchange our time, our effort, our energy, our creativity for money. It holds that place until we can go out and put it somewhere else in the world. So I actually think it does work pretty well if we just imagine talents as our modern day understanding of talents. Incidentally, the word talent does come from the ancient Greek, and specifically because it was used in this parable. So talents. The parable goes something like this, and it appears in Matthew and Luke's Gospel, and they're quite different, but here's the general gist of it. So there's a wealthy ruler who leaves their servants with a large sum of money, each according to their ability. We're told that the first servant gets 5 talents, the second servant gets 2 talents, and the third servant, who we presume the master has very little confidence in, only gets 1 talent. And the master tells the servants to put the talents to work, and then he heads off for a significant amount of time. So when he returns, he calls the servants in to settle their accounts. The first servant, the one with the 5 talents, comes in and says, "Look, I've got 10 talents now, I've doubled them." "Ah, fantastic. Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things." The second servant, who was entrusted with the 2 talents, comes in and says, "Look, master, I've created 2 more talents. I've now got 4. Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things." And then the final servant, the third servant, who we presume the master already didn't have a lot of confidence in, comes in, and he's still just got the one talent. He says, look, master, I was afraid, I think you're a pretty harsh person, and I was afraid what might happen if I lost it. So I buried it in the ground, and that way I just made sure that I could return it to you when you came home. The master says, well, if you think I'm a scary and aggressive sort of master, then that's how you'll be judged. And he says, look, why didn't you at least take that talent and put it on deposit with the bank to earn a little interest? At least then you could have repaid me with a little bit more. The poor servant didn't see that coming, did he or she? So to add insult to injury, the master then demands that the talent is taken from the third servant and given to the first servant who already has 10. Then once the master's done humiliating the third servant suitably, he commands that the worthless servant be thrown out into the darkness, where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For everyone who has more will be given, and they shall have in abundance, yet whoever does not have even what little they have will be taken away. Pretty harsh story, and some people sort of get worried about what that might mean in terms of, if we were to consider God as a figure like the master, and particularly people who have the idea of God as being something out there, like a big father figure sitting up in the sky. This could certainly be quite scary. But the way I read these parables is they're always about our internal battles. And the big internal battle here is obviously between fear and faith. The first two servants had the faith to put their talents out there, to invest them, to put them out into the world where they could then create more. And the third servant, unfortunately, was afraid. So afraid that they just buried that talent in the ground. And talent really represents the energy that I've been talking about so far today. And incidentally, in my own opinion, the master figure is simply ourselves. Because we know that feeling when we've done really well with our skills, when we've invested energy in a project and it's come off really well and we've spread joy, we feel really good about it. But the things that we perhaps hide away, that we keep buried, the talents that we don't let see the light of day, they kind of nag away at us and we get frustrated. And the weeping and gnashing of teeth bit, you think about people who have, or you think about our own experience of feeling anxious, it often manifests in our jaw and we find ourselves clenching our teeth together, which is what I reckon the original author was alluding to here. So, that energy, our talent, what happens when we take the energy that could get just leaked away in gas, acquiring more and more stuff that we end up putting in the cupboard, never to see the light of day? What happens when we take that energy and we transcend our fear and we start putting some faith in our abilities and our talents? What happens when we shift from investing in gear to investing our gear in our talents? So as a guitarist, one of the things that's really resonated with me, a little very simple sentence that I read in Eric Clapton's biography. Eric Clapton says, the tone is in your hands. Because the pursuit for the perfect guitar is often about the pursuit of the elusive, perfect tone. We want to sound just right. And you might think, coming from a guy like Eric Clapton, who has a massive array of guitars and is given guitars by big guitar manufacturers, particularly the Fender Stratocaster. I think he has a signature model out there. It's easy for you to say that tone is in your hands because you play these beautiful instruments, so you always sound good. But when we turn our mind to it, there are plenty of examples of people who make their art on really simple equipment. In 2014, I was given a CD by a family member when CDs were still something that you purchased and gave to people and supported the music industry. And the particular CD I was given, which I must have been living under a rock at the time because I'd never heard of this musician, but the CD I was given was Ed Sheeran's Multiply album. And I was blown away, not particularly by the sound of the guitar, but by the ideas. See, his guitar setup is really simple. He's got a travel guitar, a little mini Martin, with very simple electronics in it, which to my ear sound quite electronic and a bit tinny. But combined with a simple loop pedal, Ed Sheeran was creating these soundscapes that were new, that were fresh, that were brand new ideas. His songwriting was fantastic. And he didn't let the gear hold him back. He took what he had, the bare minimum of what he really needed, and he went out there and toured the world. Another guitarist that comes to mind who really didn't let the gear get in the way is Hearts. You might remember this guy, little Australian musician who had his time in the spotlight for a little while and appeared on a Subaru WRX advertisement where he was sitting in the back seat playing the guitar while the driver did donuts, and they'd rigged up the accelerator pedal as a wah pedal. Very strange ad, but I suppose this was at the time where the musicians really needed to find new ways to generate some income. So good on him. But what I really like about Heart's music is that he plays on a really cheap Squier guitar. And if you're not familiar with them, the Fender Squier is a $200 knockoff of the $2,000 Fender Stratocaster. It's made from chipboard rather than solid wood, and it has quite cheap parts. But for Hearts, the quality of the gear was no longer an excuse. He says this of it. So he says, when he's asked, why do you play such a cheap guitar? You could afford a better one now. He says, look, to be honest, a lot of people ask me why I play Squiers and not Fenders. It's just what I've gotten used to. I never could afford a Fender when I started. Just got used to playing the cheaper ones and learning how to get the best sound from those cheaper ones. Learning what you can get away with and, more importantly, what you can't get away with on those cheaper ones was an important part of my development. And in guitars, expensive and cheap don't necessarily mean more or less playable. Think about a couple of guitars that I've owned which were quite nice, but they were poorly set up, so they were tiring to play. Whereas a well set up cheap guitar can be far more enjoyable. Perfect example of how the tone is not in the instrument, it's in the hands of the player. So I wonder what would happen if every time you became aware of the scent of your gas, you just found a way to express the underlying idea. Because the underlying idea is something that you already have. You just need to have a little faith in it. Another fantastic example of this that I found is Steve Lacy, who was producing music with a band called The Internet and made beats for a fellow you might have heard of, Kendrick Lamar. He was doing all this at the age of 17, starting out with an iPod Touch. He's got a great little YouTube clip, which is a TED Talk, and it's called The Bare Maximum. He talks about his experience of just finding ways to create music with originally an iPod Touch and a little iRig. Pretty much the least amount of equipment possible to bring his ideas into the world. And technology has just gone bonkers in the world of music, and our ability to create stuff, the opportunity to create stuff is so much more readily available than it used to be. So, when we move from gear acquisition, to really investing in our talents with the gear that we already have, I believe that's where we really find the most benefit and we meet two of those higher psychological needs, which is the need for growth, which comes through practice and learning, and the need for contribution, because it takes what's inside us and we can put it out there and share it with the world. See, acquisition alone doesn't lead to contribution. Contribution requires something of us, requires us to have a bit of faith in our ideas, and faith to just put it out there and take a risk. So this week, next week, the next time you find yourself getting a bit gassy, I'd really encourage you to ask yourself, what's the underlying idea here? What's the expression that I'm hoping this piece of gear will allow me to get out? And the second question I would like you to try asking is, well, what could I do about that idea with the gear that I already have? So, as I said at the beginning, these podcasts are really about me playing with ideas, clarifying some of my own thinking. And, yep, I get a bit gassy from time to time. But in the last couple of weeks, while we were away in particular with less stuff, only what we could fit in the van, I had a guitar with me, had a pen and paper with me, and ended up writing a couple of satirical tunes, which I'm quite excited about. They seem to come quite easily without the distractions of all the other stuff that is normally around for me to do. And I look forward to sharing those with you really soon. But until we talk again, I wish you all the best. Baku.